18 months is what the cardiologist in Amarillo, Texas gave me on June 3rd, and I was 73 years old. I was sitting on the end of a table with my shirt off and my truck keys still in my fist. I'm telling you this from a rented house 2 blocks off a beach in Roxas City in the Philippines, with the afternoon rain coming down on the roof the way it does here, on more or less the same schedule every day. Dr. Reddick is the cardiologist, and she's a careful woman, and she didn't say it cruel. In March, my heart quit in a parking lot in Amarillo, and she was the one who opened the artery back up, so she'd earned the right to say it. The ambulance ran me in, and she was already standing there when they rolled me through the doors. She knew what I did for a living, because that's the first thing they ask you. 44 years hauling freight out of a yard on the east side of Amarillo. A man spends his working life making somebody else's deadline, and then he gets handed one he can't drive to. And then he starts living on it, every morning. But the driving isn't the part that got me, and neither is the parking lot. It was the number. 3 years later, I'm still in that house. I told everybody I was going for the weather. They believed me. That wasn't it, and I didn't say what was. I'd like to tell you I fought that number first, the way you'd want a man to fight it. But I didn't. It was all over me, the whole summer. So I cashed out what I had, and I bought the ticket. It happened in March, a few steps from the door of the dispatch office. I'd been off the long runs for 3 years, since 70, when they quit renewing you for the good work. So I was doing a shuttle 2 days a week for the same outfit. I got out of the cab that morning, and my left arm just felt like I'd slept on it. There was a kind of pressure sitting on me that I decided was the breakfast burrito. It didn't come on suddenly. That's not me being brave. That's me being 73 and stupid about my own body. And men our age are really good at it. You'd have called it a burrito too. A dispatcher came out to ask me about a bill of lading and found me leaning on the fender with grey in my face. I don't remember the ambulance. I remember a ceiling. And I remember a young woman saying my whole first name like she was correcting me. Then I remember 4 days later. They put a stent in and they got the artery open. It's a quick business, and most men are up walking the same day. I wasn't. My pressure went down on them in the night, and there was a tube in my throat for 2 of those days. And that's the 4 days I don't have. But the artery was never really the problem anyway. By the time they opened the pipe, a piece of the muscle had already died. Dead muscle doesn't come back. I don't know what a doctor has told you, if you ever sat where I was sitting, but that's how it was put to me. It goes to scar, and scar doesn't squeeze. I think that's right. But I nodded along in there like I had it, and I had about 1/3 of it. They did the echo in May, and I came back June 3rd for the reading. Dr. Reddick sat down and turned the screen so I could see it, which I appreciated and also didn't want. A heart that's working right pushes out somewhere around 60% of what's in the chamber, every beat. Mine was pushing out 20, and she said it twice, the second time slower. On paper, I was what they call class 3 going on 4. But that's a phrase off a chart, and what that really means in real life is that you can't get from the truck to the mailbox without stopping to breathe. There was a step up into my own apartment that I just started taking sideways, holding the rail like an old man. You know the kind of step I mean. I was an old man. Anyway, I asked her how long, and she didn't want to answer, and I made her. There's a middle number, and half of people land on one side of it and half on the other. And for somebody sitting where I was sitting, the middle number was about 18 months. Median was the word, and she used it a few times, I think, and I heard it exactly 0 times. You know how that goes. You don't hear median when you're the one on the table with your shirt off. The only thing in that room was 18 months. There was a nurse behind her at the counter, and her hands stopped. That's how I knew it was real. I was already sort of getting ready to talk myself out of the doctor, because that's how I'm built. But the hands, I don't know. Her hands, of all things. That's the part that stayed on me. What do you do with that? You get in your pickup, and you sit in a lot with the engine off and the heat coming up off the hood. And you think, do I buy groceries for the week or for the month? Do I renew anything? Is there any point at all in the dentist? And the thing that finally moved me wasn't grief, and it wasn't really fear either. It's that I'd parked in a spot marked for the clinic, and I didn't want a ticket. I just drove home doing about 40 in a 55, maybe less, with people going around me. And I didn't tell a living soul for 9 days. My son is Lorne, and he manages a tire and alignment shop outside Oklahoma City. He called me about a warranty question on his mother's car, of all the things, and it fell out of me because he was on the phone. He took it the way he takes everything, which is to make a project of it. We'd crossed that bridge when we came to it, he kept saying. And inside 2 days I had a folder in my email, second opinions. A transplant center in Houston. Something about a pump they put in your chest. That's just what a son does. And if yours ever does it to you, let him. It was also, I think, the only thing that let him get off the phone without crying. Dr. Reddick had already put the other one on the table herself back in May, and I turned it down. A defibrillator, in under the collarbone, that sits there for years doing nothing, and then one day knocks you off your feet to keep you here. It was the standard thing at my numbers, and she was right. What I didn't want was a machine whose whole job was to argue with me about when I was finished. And she wrote it down without a word. I didn't call my daughter, Bernadette, Bernie, since she was 4, and she does payroll for a hospital system in Denver. I didn't call her because she'd have known what to ask, and Lorne wouldn't, and I wasn't ready to be asked. That's the honest answer. Lorne got to her 9 days later on a Sunday because he assumed I already had. She called me late at night her time, and she didn't yell. My daughter has never yelled at me, and if she had, some of this would be easier. So I'm the last one, she says. I gave her some line about not wanting to worry her. Then, Dad, you didn't want to worry me, or you didn't want me to see it. I didn't answer her. 20 years divorced, and I've still got the same trick, which is to go quiet and let it pass over you. It never worked on Bernie, not since she was about 9. After that, we talked about once a week, and it was all weather and her kids and my pills, and there was a thing sitting under it that neither of us picked up. I wasn't a set case, and I'm not one now. I had a checking account, a paid-off pickup, an apartment I'd rented for years, and a shoebox with my logbooks in it. Nobody put me in a home, and nobody stole from me. But I'd been by myself in those rooms back home a long time, and I'd have told you it suited me fine. And it didn't. The Philippines got into my head through a man everybody at the yard called Roxas. He was my team partner 12 years, coast-runs mostly, and he was born in the city I'm sitting in and wouldn't shut up about the Philippines, and that's how he got the name. 12 years he had the top bunk, talking about crabs on a beach while we were 16 hours out and coming down on Flagstaff. I'd tell him to give it a rest, and a minute later he'd just start again, about a river and some vinegar his mother made. Roxas died in 2019 in a motel in Ontario, California, on a run I wasn't on. Stroke in his sleep, 58 years old. I didn't go to the funeral because it happened over here and I was tied up. I'd like to tell you there was more to it than that. And every year after that, his people sent me something. His nephew found me first, a fellow named John, and every December there'd be a message. Come, stay with us. And every year I just said, maybe next year, the way you do. Next year is a thing men our age hand out like candy. So in July, I opened that thread and read the whole thing. 4 Decembers of a man inviting me to something. I typed back that I was coming and that I wasn't well, and I did not say how not well. I didn't pick this place for the beach or the fish or the cost of living, really. I picked it because there were people here who already knew my name. Back home, the guy below me played his television loud, and we'd nod at each other by the mailboxes, and that was every bit of contact I had with the human race in a day. I sat down one night and worked out how it would actually go. If it happened in that apartment, best case somebody notices you're gone on a Thursday. You can run that same sum on your own place tonight, and I'd tell you not to. I sent that message at 2 a.m. Texas time. By the time I got up, 4 people I'd never met had answered it. In August I went back to Dr. Reddick with it, and then she asked me the question that turned this whole thing into arithmetic. What are you going to do about care over there? I'd love to tell you I had an answer ready, but I didn't. They've got hospitals over there, is what I came up with. And she looked at me the way you look at a man who hasn't thought about it for 1 minute and is about to. I called Medicare 3 times, 4 maybe, and the first fellow was fine, and the second one put me through to somebody else, who put me through to somebody else, and one of them kept calling me Mr. Marvin, and read me something off a screen while I stood there with the phone against my shoulder. Then she asked if there was anything else she could help me with today. The answer never moved an inch. It stays home. 44 years of my money went into that thing, and none of it buys you a bed in Roxas City. There are narrow exceptions, and if a man ever tells you your plan is the different one, get it in writing, because not one of mine reached out here. Lorne called in the middle of all that, on a Tuesday, about nothing, and he'd found a fellow on a forum in Cebu who had a hernia done for $900, and he read me the whole post out loud, including the part where the man complained about the pillows. I let him get to the end of it. Then he asked what I'd had for supper, and I said fish. Again? That was the entire call, and he didn't want the answer to the other thing any more than I did, and neither one of us brought it up. Then I tried to just buy a policy. I filled out the application with a broker who was pleasant about all of it, and he got quiet at the ejection fraction, and he sent it in anyway. I appreciate a man who doesn't lie to you at the start. The letter came on a Friday. They'd take me, and the policy would exclude anything arising from or related to my cardiac condition. For a man with an ejection fraction of 20%, that's a policy that covers you for getting hit by a bus. A second company just declined. No, nothing. I really wasn't a good bet. That's the honest answer. I took the numbers back to Dr. Reddick in September on a sheet of a legal pad because she'd asked, and she read it with her glasses down. So there's no insurance? No, I said. Then what is there? There was a 401k from the outfit, $210,000 in it, that I never really thought of as mine, more like a scorecard. Past a certain age, they don't penalize you for pulling it out, but it's taxed as ordinary income, all of it, in the year you take it. And if you're sitting there running this in your head, your accountant will not remind you of that part unless you ask him. The tax came to $46,000 and change. Texas doesn't take a state cut. Which left $164,000 sitting in an account in Amarillo. And that's the whole plan. I haven't moved it, and I won't. Dr. Reddick looked at that a while. So that's your insurance? I said yes, and you would have too, sitting in that chair with a sheet of paper on the desk you'd worked on all week. Which isn't it, really. It's money. It doesn't insure anything. The flight was 29 hours. I did it in an aisle seat with my ankles swelling up on me. At Manila, I just sat down on a bench by the domestic gate, and I did not care if the plane left without me. Then a little turboprop over the water, and down onto a strip in the middle of green. The door opens and the air comes in at you. It's hot. Everybody says hot. It sits on you like the air of a rig that's been idling all afternoon, and there's no arguing with it. I was still in the doorway when I felt my shirt go. That was me setting foot in the Philippines for the first time in my life. John was outside the fence holding a piece of cardboard over his head with Marvin written on it, an E on the end. Built like a fire hydrant, and he had his uncle's exact laugh. I wasn't ready for that. I don't know how you get ready for it. I realized whose laugh it was before I had my hand out of my pocket, and it put me sideways for a second. He just took my bag out of my hand before I could tell him not to, and he'd brought his brother-in-law's van, and 4 people in it who'd all taken the day off work to come get a stranger from Texas. The house was already rented. I'd asked for nothing, but they'd found it, cleaned it, and put a fan in it. There was rice and eggs and a jar of vinegar with peppers standing in it on the counter. From Ney Dolor, John said. At the market. My uncle liked hers. The vinegar is called Sinamak. Peppers and ginger and garlic standing in the bottle. And I think there's something else in there I've never gotten out of her. It's what this island puts on fish, and after a while you put it on everything. There's 2 bottles of it on my counter. That first night I sat on the tile floor with my back on the wall because I didn't want to get in the bed yet, and I wrote my daughter a letter. Longhand on a yellow pad I'd carried in the bag, which is what I used for logs for 40 years. I put down the true thing. I hadn't come here for the weather. Then there's most of a page about the house and what the rent was, and a dog that wasn't even mine, and 1 line about picking a town where somebody would knock on the door. And I didn't send it. I folded it into the back of the pad, and over the next 3 months I took it out and added to it 4 separate times, and it got to be 5 pages, and I never sent any of that either. The 19 days after that, I mostly didn't open the curtains. Nobody knew that. Probably some of them did and didn't say it. John came by every 2nd or 3rd day, and I'd be up and dressed for him with the kettle on. He'd sit a while and go, and I'd just get back in the chair. That was about it, really. There was a brown dog with a bad ear sleeping against my gate, and I gave it the fish skins. What I actually did in those weeks was weigh myself. I'd bought a bathroom scale my 2nd week here, out on the highway, and it reads in kilos. So I was doing the arithmetic in my head every morning. Every morning at 5, I stood on it and wrote the number on the wall by the door in pencil. 81.1, 80.9. Because with this thing, the water comes on you before you ever feel it. 2 kilos in 3 days means your body's holding it, and you change something that day, not Friday. If you're looking after somebody with a bad heart, that scale is worth more to you than any story I've got. I counted the steps to the gate too. 22 of them. 23 maybe. I never got the same count twice. You'd count them too. Don't tell me you wouldn't. Not if somebody had handed you a date. And I counted how many I could do before the pressure came up under my collarbone. And for a while, that was 11. What was I doing there, really? I've asked myself that. Did I think it would be peaceful? Did I think there'd be some kind of, I don't know, some kind of settling that comes over a man? Because what actually happens, is that you sit in a plastic chair in a hot room in a country where you can't read the labels. And you wait, and nothing comes. And then the rain comes on the way it does, and then it's the next day. That was the whole content of 19 days. It's kind of a joke on a man who spent his life moving. I don't know what I expected. Something, maybe. I really don't. The one thing I had scheduled was the boy with the blood pressure cuff. Crisanto. Everybody calls him Anto, and he's a nurse at a little clinic a few minutes from my gate, young enough to be my grandson. John set it up before I ever landed. 2 visits a week. I paid him for it, and it really wasn't much, and it's the best money I've ever spent. Twice a week he'd come in, take the cuff out, do it twice, look at my ankles, ask what the scale said, and write it in a notebook of his own. And in the 3rd week, I gave him the thing I'd been saying to myself since March. The heart thing was really just a plumbing problem. They'd fixed the pipe, and now it was a matter of taking it easy. He put the cuff down. No, the artery's open, yes, and that part is finished. But the muscle that died is scar, and the pump is weak, and it'll always be weak. What keeps you out of a hospital bed isn't taking it easy. It's the 4 pills and the salt, and that scale on the floor. If you gain 2 kilos in 3 days, you call me that day, not the next day. And you have to walk. I was 73 with a heart like a wet paper bag, I said, and walking was the last thing on this earth I was going to do. Okay. But he wrote something on a card and put it under the fan so it wouldn't blow off, and left. And when I finally looked at it, it said the corner. Just the corner, in blue pen. I don't know what you'd have done with a card like that. I sat 2 days with it on the table. Packing store is on the corner, and he keeps a sari-sari. A sari-sari is the front room of somebody's house with a screen across the window and everything in the world behind it in single pieces. 1 cigarette, a packet of shampoo, 2 aspirin out of a strip. You don't buy a box of anything here. You buy what you need today. And if that sounds to you like doing without, it isn't. The first month I thought it was about being poor. Everybody on that street does it, and some of them have money. The first morning I walked to that corner, it took me 9 minutes, and I had to sit down on a plastic chair outside Parking's window. My ears were ringing. Parking came out and just put a cold bottle of water in my hand, and he didn't say one word about it, and he went back in. I sat there working out what you're supposed to do with that. I never came up with anything. Parking is the one who taught me what things cost. He wouldn't take a bill from me for a bar of soap without telling me first what the change ought to be. The house is 11,000 pesos a month, and in dollars that's not much of anything, and the rate moves on you anyway. Concrete, 2 bedrooms, 2 blocks of the water at bye-bye. My pills run about 2,800 pesos a month for all 4, give or take. 3 are old drugs that cost almost nothing, and the 4th is the new kind, and it's most of that. That same pill was $190 a month back home, on the drug plan. I eat fish that was in the water before it got light, and a lot of it. There's a young guy who runs me places. And there's the electric, and the electric here isn't cheap, and that one really got me. If you're sitting there running this same sum, put the electric higher than you think you need to. Social Security is 1970 a month. It lands the same in a bank here as it did back home, and nobody at that end has ever asked me where I sleep. What I spend is between 650 and 800, probably the 8 with the beer. But that's a comfortable month and not a scraping one, and it isn't the month something happens to you, which leaves better than 1,000 a month I don't spend. Some of it goes back into that account, and some of it goes places I'd have to sit down and account for, and I never have. What I didn't count on was what one bad week would take out of that account. The second week I got passed to the corner. The third week, or maybe the fourth, I got to the end of the lane where it opens onto the road, and I just stood there with my hands on my knees like a fool while the tricycles went around me. By the fifth week, I was going all the way down to the fishport at first light, which is about 1 kilometer, a little more. At 5 in the morning, the port is loud. Ice is coming off a truck in blocks, and men are breaking it with a mallet. There are crates of blue crabs going by on shoulders, with the claws still moving, and something's always spilling. Roxas calls itself the seafood capital of the Philippines, and that isn't a slogan somebody made up in an office. There's a smell of diesel and salt and fish and wet concrete that you can't get out of your clothes. It put me in mind of a rail yard, which makes no sense at all. I liked it right away, and for the first time in months, I wanted to be somewhere at 5. Which is less than it sounds like. I mean, it wasn't any change of heart. It was, I wanted to be somewhere at 5. That's the size of it. Tay Sabas was already walking there when I started, and had been for years. 81 years old, small, straight-backed, and he wears a bucket hat and long sleeves in the heat, like a man who knows something you don't. Retired out of the provincial engineering office, and he walks the Seawall from the port to the mouth of the Banica and back, 6 mornings out of 7, and on Sundays he goes with his daughter to the church at Panay, the one with the enormous bell in it. He fell in beside me the first morning I made it that far, and he didn't ask me anything. He just started walking at exactly the speed I was walking. Months later I realized that was a kindness, I think, though I doubt he'd call it that. Because it meant I never once had to say out loud that I can't go faster. Or, the man walks slow now, and I've built a whole thing out of it. You'd have had to be out there, and I was out there, and I still go back and forth on it. Nay Dolor came into it not long after. She's the one who makes the vinegar, and she walks up the seawall from the other direction. And she looked me over that first morning, head to foot, and didn't like much of what she saw. I went and found her table the week after that, under a blue tarp on the near side of the market, with the peppers going up the inside of the glass. I held out my empty bottle, and she filled it, past where I'd have stopped, and just pushed my money back with 2 fingers, and wouldn't look at it again. I put it back on the crate, but I lost that one. Then she called the woman at the next table over, and the 2 of them looked at my feet. That's how I found out my ankles were being discussed at the market. Yaya found us at the turnaround one morning and never asked whether she could come. 66, a widow, husband a mechanic who died the year before I came. She was the loud one, and she talked the whole kilometer, mostly in Capiznon, some of it at me, and it didn't matter that I couldn't follow it. After a while I quit pretending to, and just made noises in the gaps. You'd think a thing like that would wear thin on a person. It never did on her. 4 of us most mornings. 5 when John's mother came. Tay Sabas gave me exactly one instruction in all the mornings since, and it had nothing to do with my heart. One morning he knocked on the seawall and said, "This side going out, that side coming back." And he'd only brought it up because I kept drifting into people, I think. Nobody counted anything, not the distance, not the minutes. There was never a, "let's do 2 more today," and there wasn't a watch out there, not one. Tay Sabas walks to the mouth of the river because that's where the river is, not because it's a kilometer and change. The outfit gave me a plaque when I passed 1,000,000 miles, and I knew the week I was going to pass it 4 months out, and I never once put a truck on its side in all of it, or a mark on anybody else's. And I'd have told you that was just how a man keeps his own score. And there I was, showing up every morning with a number on my wall in pencil, and a count of my own steps in my head, and I was the only one doing it. I asked Ney Dolor once, in my terrible half of a language, how long she'd been coming down here in the mornings. She thought about it and said, "Since my husband. Never a number, and I don't think she has one." And for the first time in my life, I was standing next to somebody who wasn't counting anything at all. By the 4th month, I could do the Seawall and back without stopping. I still weighed myself every morning, because that part is medicine and I'm not stupid. But I quit counting steps somewhere in there. Around the 4th month maybe. I don't remember the week. I did ask Anto for a number once, that spring, on the bench at the clinic, with my sleeve rolled up. He'd just finished the cuff and was writing it down. "All right, give me your honest guess. How long have I got?" He's a young man, and I put that on him like it was nothing. He didn't look up. He said, "I don't do that." I said, "Everybody does that. My doctor in Texas did that." And he said, "Your doctor gave you a middle number for 1,000 people, and you are not 1,000 people." He said it twice, because I didn't take it the first time. Something about a number being for the doctor, so the doctor knows what to do next, and not for me to carry around in my pocket. He was right. I realized that on the walk home, and I was sore at him about it for 2 days. I still went on eating the dried fish for a while though, because you have to keep something. That first December, when I'd been in the country a little over 2 months, there was the business with the barong. There's a festival here the first week of December called Sinadja Sahalaran. It's the biggest week of the year in this part of the Philippines. A river of people down the main road, food stalls, boats, lights strung across everything. John let me know ahead of time that I was coming and to wear a barong. It's just what you wear here when something matters. I didn't have one. What I had was a barong I'd bought in the airport in Manila in a hurry, with a plane leaving. I picked it by holding it up in front of me, and I really did think that was enough. But I'd done the whole thing in about 4 minutes. It was 3 sizes too big. The shoulders were down my arms, and there was a tag hanging out the back on a plastic loop that I couldn't see and didn't know about. I put it on over a white undershirt with a pair of grey running sneakers, and I walked out my gate feeling like $1,000,000. They laughed. I've heard people tell these stories like the whole street stood there being noble. That is not what happened. A woman by the water station saw me first and got her hand up over her mouth, and it did not help her one bit, and then she was gone. And once she went, the 2 men with her went. And it traveled down that street like a wave going out. Kids had their phones up. Somebody I never identified took a picture of the back of me with the tag hanging, and it went around the whole barangay inside an hour. I've seen it since, several times, usually shown to me by somebody who thinks I haven't. I realized about halfway down that road that they were not going to stop. But I stood there in the middle of a road in a shirt built for a man and a half, and I laughed too, because what else are you going to do? And then Nadalo came through them. She got hold of my sleeve. She said something over her shoulder that emptied the laughing out of that street in a couple of seconds. Then she walked me the 2 blocks to her house, and her daughter-in-law was already coming out with a shirt on a hanger. It had been her husband's, cream-colored, worn soft at the collar, and it fit. They took the sneakers off my feet and put me in leather sandals, and somebody wet a comb and did something to my hair without asking. Then Nadalo stepped back and looked at me and said one word. John told me later it just means better. That's all it means. And then we went back out into the same street, and I ate crab with my hands off a banana leaf half the night. The airport barong is still on the nail on the back of my bedroom door. It's still there. The windows here are made out of oyster shell, capiz shell, flat and clear and cut into squares, and I've got a lamp made of it. John showed me the sheds where they cut them, because he got tired of me asking. There's a smell in there I don't much like. A man in the back was cutting them on a jig he'd made himself out of a bicycle rim. The lamp was 400 pesos, I want to say, maybe more. It's on the table by the door. John's cousin cut it, or his wife's cousin. I get those two mixed up and I've never straightened it out. Tay Sabas took me out to Panay one Sunday after the walk, in his daughter's car, because I'd asked about the bell once. It's the biggest one in the country, in a shed of its own beside the church. You can put your hand flat on it. It's cold in that heat, and I wasn't expecting cold. I stood there with my palm on a thing that had been ringing over that town since before my grandfather was born, and I didn't say the part I was thinking to anybody. His daughter asked me in English whether I had a church at home. Not for a long time, I said. Well, she says, this one's mostly a bell. The walk on Sunday runs late because nobody's got anywhere to be. One Sunday I had coffee on and a pan of eggs going when they came past my gate, and I called them in. I stood at that stove with about a year left on me by the arithmetic, cracking eggs for people who had no idea. But the next Sunday 2 of them came without being called, and now it's a table in my yard, and there's coffee and rice and eggs and whatever fish came off the boat, and John brings the grill down off his place at Bye if the weather's right, and I don't run it and I don't organize it. It just happens at my house and I put the coffee on. You can't arrange for that. I've gone over what I did to bring it on and it wasn't anything. His own place is a row of tables on the sand at Bye with a grill built out of a cut drum. Crab and sea urchin split open with a spoon standing in it. John just put one in front of me the first time without telling me what it was, and everybody stopped eating to watch, which is how I knew. You'd have known too. I haven't had it since. There are 7 plastic chairs at that table, and one of them has a piece of blue pipe sleeved over the front left leg where it broke. A fellow named Boking does that, out behind Parking's store, with a propane torch and a bucket of cut pipe, and a stack of chairs sitting upside down. That one was standing out in the yard my first August here, when the banica came up over the road by the bridge and stood in Parking's doorway, and it came through fine. Nobody sits in it. If I'm laid back from the market, the table's full and that chair's empty. I've never asked about it. You don't, when you're the foreigner at somebody's table. There's no title. Nobody calls me father or grandfather or any of that. They call me Marvin. Thurman showed up at that table about a year in. From Michigan, been here 9 years, maybe 10. He'll tell you inside a minute that he's on borrowed time himself, some kidney thing, and then he'll never mention it again, except to use it as the reason he's right. And he really is right, a lot. One Sunday he was right about the tides, and still right about it an hour later, after everybody else had moved on. He's got plenty to say about the mayor too, and he told me once that you've got to take it one day at a time. That little motorcycle of his gets parked across two spaces at the church every Sunday, front wheel turned in. The man plays the harmonica, and he plays it beautifully, and he won't do it in front of a human being. I found that out walking back from packings one evening, past the side of his house. I stood by that wall a while, a couple of minutes I think, listening to something slow that I didn't know. Then I just walked on. I've never told him, and I never will. By then, Yaya had gotten us all into the karaoke. It's a machine that lives in somebody's front room. It comes on at 8 and goes until it goes, and nobody cares whether you can sing. She sang the same old song every time, and you couldn't have made her care. And she'd hand me the second microphone, and I'd just hold it and mouth at it like a man in a church he doesn't belong to. Bernie called on a Sunday in that stretch, her Saturday night, and wanted to know whether I was eating. Fine, the weather's good, and the food's good, and I'd made some friends. Every word of that was true, and all of it together was a lie. She asked what the doctors here said. Happy with me, which they were not particularly. Then she asked me straight out if I was in any pain, and I said no, and she let it go. She let it go because I taught her to. That's not fair to her. She's 44 and she makes her own decisions. But I taught her. 30-odd years of a father who answers a question with the smallest true thing available. Afterward, I just sat and looked at the call time on the screen. 6 minutes. The 5 pages in the yellow pad were in a drawer I could have gotten to without putting my shoes on. That's the part I'd change. Not the ticket. The money I'd do the same, and the doctor I'd do the same. 6 minutes on a Sunday with the whole thing already written down, and I didn't get up. It wasn't cowardice exactly. You'd think a man with a date on him would get out of a chair. It was more like, I don't know, the same thing it always was. And December 3rd came around in the middle of the festival week, the way any Tuesday comes around. There were lights strung over the main road and a stage half built by the plaza, and none of it had one thing to do with me. 18 months from June 3rd is December 3rd of the following year. I'd known that date the way you know your own birthday, from the first week on. I woke up at 4:30, because that's when I wake up. I stood on the scale, 81.4. I wrote it on the wall in pencil, under the one from the day before. I took the 4 pills with half a glass of water. I put my shoes on, and I walked down to the port, and along the Seawall, with Tay Sabas, and Ney Dolor, and Yayay. The ice was coming off the truck. A man I don't know said good morning to me, the way he says it every morning, and I said nothing to anybody. What was I going to say? Say it to who? Excuse me, today's the day a woman in Texas said I'd be finished by. And then what? Everybody stands around on the seawall, being sorry for a man who's plainly standing right there? There's no way you say that sentence out loud without asking somebody for something. And you know what people do when you ask them for that? But I walked, and I came home, and I made rice, and I sat in the yard, and my hands were shaking, and it wasn't the heart. I didn't sleep much that week. I'd get up at 2 and just sit in the dark in the yard. One of those nights I stood on the scale in the dark and wrote the number on the wall by feel, and in the morning it was crooked and running downhill of the others. I've read what people write about this, and it's all gratitude and second chances, and I think, well, good for you. But what I had was, closer to being caught at something. Because if the number was wrong, then I'd spent 3 months in Texas and 19 days behind the curtain in this house, arranging my own ending, quietly, and telling myself I was being sensible. And I realized out there in the dark that nobody had made me do any of it. A woman gave me a middle number. I heard a verdict. Those aren't the same thing. And nobody told me they weren't. And nobody had to. That one's on me. I told Tay Sabas on the 8th day, on the Seawall, at the turnaround by the river mouth. And I did it badly. The doctors in America gave me a date, and the date was last Tuesday. He kept walking, a few steps. Then he said, "Mine ran out twice." I stopped, but he didn't, so I had to catch up to him. And that's how I found out this man had been given a year in about 2010 for something in his stomach, and a shorter one in 2019, and he'd walked the seawall through both. And in over a year of mornings, he'd never mentioned either one to me or to anybody else out there. I don't know what you do with a man like that. I asked him why he never said. He shrugged and gave me something I only got half of, and Nadolaw had caught us up by then and gave me the rest of it. It came out to about, because what would that be for? Because what would that be for? Which, I've turned that over a lot of mornings since, and I still don't think I've got all of what he meant by it. The 20th month is when it came for me. It came in February, and it came on suddenly. I'd been down to John John's 2 nights running, and there was a soup with a broth I had 2 bowls of. Then on the 4th morning, the scale said 4 kilos up from Sunday. I stood on it 3 times, the way you do when you want a thing to say something else. By that afternoon, I couldn't get to the corner. 20 yards, and I was hanging on the wall, breathing through a wet rag, and lying down flat made it worse, which nobody tells you. I called Anto late in the day, and he was at my gate inside of 20 minutes. He just listened to me breathe and didn't make a face. By 6, I had a needle in my arm and oxygen in my nose, in a hospital in a province whose language I don't speak. If you want to know what that's like, it's mostly the ceiling. 3 nights. They pushed the water off me with an IV drug, and I lost 2 kilos the first night. A cardiologist changed 2 of my doses and put the soup down to salt, with no blame in it. I haven't had that broth since. The 3 nights came to about 110,000 pesos. They wanted a deposit before they'd put me in a bed, and the rest before they'd let me out of it, because I am a foreigner with nothing behind me but that account. Sitting there, signing for the deposit, is where I finally heard what I'd told Dr. Reddick a year and a half before, at a table in Amarillo with a legal pad on it. That money is for the night your chest fills up with water, and somebody wants cash before they'll start an IV. I'd said it out loud to a doctor, and I hadn't believed a word of it. Then the echo after, and a trip over to Iloilo in the spring to put a camera in my heart and be sure the stent was still open, which is where the real money went. By the time it was finished, it was about 6,900 out of that account, the first real bite out of the 164,000. On the second night, around 2 in the morning, I called my daughter. Not because I needed anything. I called because I was frightened. And that's the first time in my life I picked up a phone for that. "Hi, Dad," she says, and I could hear an office behind her. Then I couldn't do the next part. She said, "Are you dying?" And what do you say to that? I said I didn't know. And then I started telling her about the doses and about the drug they use to push the water off you, because that was the part I had words for at 2 in the morning with a needle taped to my hand. I'd thought so for 2 years, and been wrong so far. And she didn't answer for a long time, and I let it run. Bernie came 11 days later, on her own money, with a carry-on and no plan. Nadolor took her hands in both of hers at the market and talked at her a good while, and Bernie let it happen without understanding a word. On the 9th day, I gave her the letter. 5 pages, yellow paper, 4 pens. She read it at the table with the empty chair at the end, and when she finished, she said, "This is dated the day you got here." I said, "Yes." She said, "You came here to die, and you let me find out when you got scared enough to call, and you wrote it down and didn't send it. That's the worst thing you have ever done to me." She's right. We talk every Sunday night now, and it's real talk, but it isn't fixed. Lorne came for 6 days last summer and brought up a facility in Oklahoma City. It is what it is. We email now. Yaya died on a Wednesday night at home, in her own bed, between one Sunday and the next. A stroke, quick, and she was 68. Nadolor came to my gate at 4:30 and told me, and then we walked. Nobody proposed it, and it didn't get called off either. 3 of us went down to the port and along the seawall and back in the dark, at the same speed we always go. Not a word the whole way, and nobody walked in the 4th place. But there's nothing good to say about that morning. She had a grandson she was raising, and somebody else raises him now. And she'd been at Tay Saba's the whole year about a gate latch at her sister's place, and I never did hear what was wrong with it. She was the loudest of us and the youngest. 68. I've had a year to come up with what that's supposed to mean, and what I've got is that's the order it went in, which isn't anything. That's about where I am with it. Anto still comes twice a week, and he does the cuff twice and writes it in that notebook of his. And he has never once turned it around and shown me, and I quit asking a long time ago. This place did not cure me. If that's the part you were waiting for, I haven't got it. They did the echo again in the spring, and it's come up some, and the scar is still the scar. I take the 4 pills, and I stand on a scale before anything else. What I'll take credit for is small. I walk, and I quit eating what I was eating. Listen to your doctors, and don't listen to an old truck driver on the internet. My knees hurt worse than my heart does, and I'm 76. It's not the years, it's the miles. When the river came up over the road last year, I got 4 packets of noodles onto packing's shelf, and then sat down and let the young man finish. And there are days when I can't follow one word of it, and I sit at my own table with 9 or 10 people talking, and I'm the only one who doesn't know the joke. And I've got a son who thinks I picked a beach over him, and he isn't wrong. Thurman asked me at the table in April why I don't go back, now that I've, and he did an arm gesture instead of finishing the sentence. I said, go back to what? Your own country? Your own doctors? So I gave him the only true thing I had. Over there I'd be a man with a condition, and here I'm a man who's late. That is not as good as it sounded in my head. A woman on the bench at the clinic asked Anto what was wrong with the American, and I asked him after what he'd told her. This is the one who walks in the morning. Bernie gave the letter back the day she left and said, that's yours. Write me a better one. It's in the drawer by my bed, and I haven't yet. I will. Tay Sabas is 83 now and still walks in front. I was up before 5 today, because he doesn't wait on anybody, and there's a table of people who expect me at the corner. Has a doctor ever put a number on you? Or on somebody you're looking after? What did you do with the days after?